Hey, what is up? My name is Desmond, and welcome to episode 1 of my new YouTube show and podcast, The Understory. This show is going to be a mix of politics, theory, and cultural commentary, and this first episode is going to act as a kind of base from which I'll expand on ideas I'm presenting in future episodes, and for you to get an idea of who I am and what I'm trying to accomplish. And with that, I'm just going to get right to the point. Look, I get it. They did it again. They insinuated, they smeared, they lied, they betrayed, they collaborated, and they even cheated. I have hours and hours of disgusting anti-Bernie smears I saved on my hard drive, and it would be impossible for me to judge anyone for being disgusted by the primary process and by the Democratic Party right now. Through a process that I would call electioneering and the manufacturing of consent, the elite members of the Democratic Party seem to have robbed us of the best presidential candidate we may ever see in our whole lifetime. Twice. They did it twice. If you're disgusted and infuriated by what we're told is our democracy, and specifically the Democratic Party, I completely understand. I feel it too. And there are so many on the left who I respect and care about who are also feeling this way. It would not just be irrational for anyone to try to convince people otherwise, it would effectively be gaslighting. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, today, I want to talk about strategy. Due to the level of justified anger and disillusionment among the left, it really feels to me like the left has become aimless and floundering, and starting to act more on anger than strategy. Justified anger, yes, but unfortunately it's leading us to, in large part, waste a lot of our political capital we've built over the years, as well as waste our time and energy following misguided and spite-fueled efforts. In short, bad strategy. I think a lot of this problem stems from a lack of understanding of how we got here as a movement, and therefore what it takes to actually win. So today, I want to go over a short history of the left and what we can learn from that history to make the left stronger going forward. I also want to sketch out one strategy as well as some tactics that I personally think are good to adopt in order to do that strategy. I want to be really clear though, I don't think that this is the only strategy that can work, but it is one that makes a lot of sense to me and feels unfortunately completely ignored by the online left, including many people I really respect and like a lot, and even including myself up until very recently. I was a huge fan of Michael Brooks, and one of the most important things I took away from him as an influence in my life, and even in his tragic early passing, was that compassion with people in the face of their ignorance and your own irritation is a powerful olive branch that many people will respond very positively to. As Michael said, be ruthless with systems, but be kind with people. In that vein, and because he was a major reason why I have this show and channel to begin with, I feel a renewed sense of urgency for us to rethink the direction we're taking strategically as a political movement. Red flags have been going off for weeks, and now it's extremely clear to me what role I should play in this political movement at this moment. And I'm hoping I can convince some other people to join me in this. Also, almost everything that I'm going to criticize here are things that I myself and people I respect a lot also have done. So please believe me when I say none of this criticism is moral judgment, just analysis and strategy. Alright, enough of that, let's get to the point. The first thing to understand about the left is that 10 years ago, what we now call the left and differentiate from liberals didn't exist. There was no squad, no not me us, no progressive movement. The closest thing to leftist media was Democracy Now! And Michael Moore. There definitely were no open socialists almost winning primaries in the Democratic presidential election. So how did we get from there to here? Quite simply, liberals became radicalized through frustration with the Democratic Party and formed the left. This happened because of lots of reasons, but I'd say the main one is that anti-war liberals already felt deceived and sickened by Bush's war of aggression on Iraq and Afghanistan. When Obama ran a campaign condemning those wars, as well as economic inequality.
First, we've got to stop spending $10 billion a month in Iraq while they run up a surplus. I'll end this war responsibly so we can invest here at home.
American liberals became even more disgusted and became completely disillusioned when Obama not only ramped up the use of drone strikes which reliably killed civilians, he let almost all of the architects of the '08 financial crimes and subsequent economic recession go completely scot-free. Not only did most of them do no jail time, they even got rewarded with bailout packages they just spent on big bonuses for guess who? Themselves. This sparked outrage, which kicked off the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was one of the first truly populist protests of its kind the United States had seen in decades. And because it was now online, it was truly the first of its kind. This is the event that I would say approximately marks the birth of what we now call the left.
Can I get some water?
Through these failures and through a frustration that grew more and more intense as people began to realize that Obama never intended to follow through on campaign promises, as well as visible and physical solidarity and shared struggle toward mutual goals such as supporting Black Lives Matter, resisting NSA spying, and supporting the Standing Rock protests is what solidified the left into a distinct political movement. This is how we became a big and strong enough political movement to nearly win in 2016 in a surprise bid for the presidency under the flag of Bernie Sanders, an open socialist. So what I'm saying is that it's critical to any kind of winning leftist strategy in America to understand that what we call the left today began as just a group of radicalized liberals, and that what we call liberals today is still the main group that we need to court in order to grow our numbers. I mean, people talk about radicalizing the youth and turning out non-voters, and that's fine. But they'll never ever be replacement for political courtship within the party. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that we should try to get along with every liberal or in any way kowtow to them. Many of them are completely unreachable and, just like the far right, should be treated as such. But I am saying it's basically impossible to substantially increase our political power in any reasonable time frame without drawing some of them over to our way of thinking. So with that in mind, let's talk about what it's going to take to bring those liberals to the left. Well, as I said before, there's a lot of evidence that what we now call the left was formed as a reaction to disappointment with the Democratic President Barack Obama. There's also a fair amount of evidence that suggests that this surge of dissatisfaction within the Democratic Party was somewhat arrested after the election of and during the administration of Donald Trump. Also, while Bernie Sanders did perform well once again in 2020, he didn't really perform much, if any, better than he did in 2016. What this suggests is that liberals who might have otherwise been radicalized by disappointment with neoliberalism under, let's say, Hillary Clinton,
we came, we saw, he died.
and who would have otherwise joined the left, are instead focusing their dissatisfaction and their anger almost entirely on Donald Trump. This is a powerful strategic argument for electing Joe Biden as a leftist that many people don't really consider. If Joe Biden were president, then all of the faults of neoliberalism can be exposed and contrasted against our own solutions as socialists and leftists. We can show the liberals that although we have mostly shared goals, our methods are different and much better. If Obama was so mediocre that it formed the left, imagine what Joe Biden will do.
Guess what? I ain't dead, and I'm not gonna die.
He would be the most middling, least impressive, least flexible, and honestly goofy Democratic presidents in decades.
Wait, you're getting nervous, man.
Not to mention, his history of racist legislation in the Senate makes him extremely vulnerable to attacks from the left.
And Madam President, we have predators on our streets.
Leftists cite all of those negative qualities as a reason why we shouldn't vote for him. I cite it as a reason he's a perfect political foil to show why the left is better and why Democrats should have nominated Bernie Sanders. But that can only happen if Biden wins. If Donald Trump were to continue being in the White House, the liberals will just get more and more dug in and more rationally focused with their hate and frustration towards Trump. Not Nancy Pelosi, not Joe Biden, Trump. And the cycle will continue. In fact, what's worse than that, the more we try to criticize neoliberalism while Trump is in power, the less we present ourselves as a reliable ally against the liberals' number one enemy. Not to mention that everyone seems to agree that if the Democrats lose this election, they will blame the left.
You think the Democratic Party is going to bend over to the left after you prove you won't vote for them? You really think they won't just go, oh, well, we went too far left this election. That's why we lost to Trump 2 times.
If Biden loses, you know what they'll say? They'll say, see, the problem was Biden listened too much to the left. Kamala Harris listened too much to the left. They ran too far left. They needed to be more centrist.
And even though this is only 2 examples, I agree with them. And I don't think there's a lot of people that would disagree, which means that all of the hatred that the liberals have towards Trump will be also shared with the left.
and no one's ever gonna fucking forget it, you motherfuckers.
That's the opposite of what we want to do. And this is without mentioning anything about how materially dangerous and destructive Donald Trump is by himself. All this is why I think leftists should vocally and visibly support Biden in the general election. I know that's a pretty hot take for some people, but it really shouldn't be. Whether Joe Biden is elected or not, if the left presents itself as being unsupportive of Joe Biden during the general election, it puts us in a very bad position to show the 5 things I think we'll need to show in order to win liberal votes over to our cause. Namely, the first is that we have shared goals as liberals. We don't have to share all the same goals, obviously, but we should emphasize the ones we have and work to convince liberals that the things we want, they should want too. The second is that our solution towards those shared goals, which differ from neoliberals, are in the best interests of liberals. Again, this may take some persuasion, but if it takes persuasion, then we should work to do that. The third is that our solution will work better than what they're currently being offered by neoliberals like Joe Biden, or that will be offered by conservatives like Rick Wilson at the Lincoln Project. 4, that we're willing to work together with liberals on our terms towards those shared goals if they come work with us. And 5, maybe most importantly, that we can be trusted to act in good faith according to our principles. It's important to point out that none of these 5 things require us to give up on any of our values. Making the tent bigger doesn't have to mean moving it to the right, and it never should. I'm very confident that neoliberalism will fail again like it always does, and when it does, liberals in the party will once again try to find a better answer. If we can do those 5 things, and we can present ourselves as the better, more just, and more functional option between neoliberalism, conservatism, and democratic socialism, liberals will once again come over to the left just like they did under Obama, and our numbers will swell. If we instead present ourselves as unreasonable, selfish, crazy, threatening, guillotine-wielding weirdos, while the conservatives present themselves as sane, safe, and sensible alternatives to neoliberalism, we will have missed our opportunity and the party will drift in the wrong direction. The same thing will happen if conservatives can show that they're more valuable and more reliable Democratic Party voters than the left. That's not what we want. This is something Bernie Sanders understands quite well, which helps to explain why Bernie made it a point to call Joe Biden his friend as often as possible, as well as explain many of his other actions, including very publicly working on a unity effort with liberals. So how do we make sure that we're in a position to do all this? Well, whether Joe Biden gets elected or not, which I'm hoping he does, honestly, there are a few big things I've seen that really need to stop and a few things that we need to do a lot more of. So let's take a look at those. Okay, I will admit I like the music. Yeah, that's pretty good. But unfortunately, I gotta tell you, it's hard to imagine any way short of actually harming people. You could drive 99% of potential support away faster than doing something like this. Not to mention, there's nothing less scary to the capitalist owner class than a small pack of revolutionary communists brought up on terroristic threat charges with zero support from the community.
They seem quite optimistic to me. Maybe they do want to fight.
In other words, don't do this. Don't get me wrong. I was in support of almost every aspect of the protests that were happening around the country, including being in support of protesters that chose to defy the police, technically breaking the law, or even going as far as to clash with the police. Again, I didn't support all of it, but most. What I don't support is needlessly alienating potential class and political allies. This is just one of the things I've seen that people have been doing lately, ostensibly in service of a continued effort to protest police violence and authoritarianism more generally, that's ended up making the cause more repellent to those who might otherwise support them. Now, I understand there's a case to be made for protest through property destruction, but this is about strategy. Is it better to smash the bank, or is it better to grow your numbers? I'm arguing in this case, it's better to grow your numbers. Let's not forget, any movement that expects to be able to make sweeping changes like reforming, let alone significantly reducing the amount of policing on American streets, has to be overwhelming support from the masses, which means if you're going to alienate potential allies, you should have a good reason at least. The reason cities like Portland and Seattle made concessions to the protesters a couple months ago is that the city officials were concerned of it picking up more and more support if they didn't. But for reasons that go far beyond the scope of this conversation, that support dwindled among the less hardcore protesters. Regardless of why that happened, the end result was a cease to negotiations between mayors and police chiefs and the crowds, and a hardening of positions in both Republican and Democratic parties. And while it's impossible to prove a causal relationship between the optics of the protests and the diminishing support between mainstream Americans, I think it would be pretty dubious to argue that there isn't a causal relationship between that lack of support and the hardening of positions from officials and major political parties. Which means that in all cases, it's always better to have more support from people with shared goals than less. And burning that support for literally no discernible reason is always just dumb. Number 2 is stop getting in the way of the liberals' 2 minutes of orange man bad hate. Instead, use it to our advantage. This is something I see all the time that drives me crazy. There was a recent poll that said upwards of 60% of Biden voters are going to choose him over Trump in the general election because, quote, he's not Trump, unquote. In other words, liberal Democrats hate Donald Trump.
He's a fucking idiot, and everyone knows it.
Why are we putting ourselves in the firing line between them and their most hated political enemy?
You're a fucking idiot for standing by him.
When we could instead be next to them in the trenches, patting them on the back and saying, you know what, that's a great point. Orange man is bad. What a smart take. And you know what else is bad? Prison labor. And while I agree that a liberal saying that they'd gleefully spread KKK propaganda if it were ostensibly anti-Trump is a pretty spicy take, and like this fine gentleman here says, broke-brained and deranged, what does that make us if we don't use people like this to spread our own message? Let's stop throwing these opportunities away.
It's free real estate.
And not only that, when we've got people going to every single anti-Trump thread, spamming our hot takes about how Biden is also racist or whatever, at a certain point, the cumulative effect doesn't just appear to be whataboutism, it actually is whataboutism. And why? What are we doing this for? Let's not forget, Orange Man is bad. That's actually true. Orange Man is actually very bad. Let's not overthink this one. Liberals and us agree on that. Rather than actively working against shared goals and alienating potential allies at the same time, we want them to actually see us fighting toward the same shared goal. In this case, just resistance to Donald Trump in general. It's really easy. It's not too complicated. It really is just Orange Man bad. But doing this is extremely important in gaining rapport and trust so that later we can bring them on board with our way of doing things. But of course not. Instead, we give away all our easy allies to the astroturfers in the Lincoln Project. I'm sorry. It's just, we really got to get better. Alright, the third thing I'd suggest is stop using the term libs and dems by themselves or as pejoratives without at least being specific to whom and what you're talking about. The reason for this is really simple. The people you're calling liberals in a denigrating way, or the people that hear this, believe that the word liberal means everyone that's left of center, which in a way it kind of does. As I said earlier, even though we like to differentiate ourselves from the more moderate liberals, the left are liberals too, just more hardcore and dedicated liberals.
What did you say?
Okay, that's a whole debate on its own, so let's not get caught up on that. I know it's going to set some people off, but that's just my opinion. Anyway, the point is that when you say, I hate liberals, and just kind of leave it at that, that means that logically, to them, you must be right of center. And because Democrats, just like Republicans, admittedly are quite tribalistic when it comes to political parties, when you blithely hand wave at the Dems, you also suggest you're in the out group. And while that may not bother many people, it's very counterproductive to the strategy I'm promoting here. A perfect example of this happened just today, when liberals were circulating a pretty foul and honestly racist anti-Trump hashtag. When this person made a completely accurate criticism of that, he started it out with, "Really, liberals?" The replies made it clear that the angry liberals who were responding believed this was the work of a Trumper, and basically nothing that was said after that point could convince them otherwise. While this stupidity is clearly the fault of the tribalism and stubbornness of the liberals I'm describing, this all probably could have been entirely avoided by not hand-waving at the liberals to begin with. So instead, call out individual Dems, or explain what it is about neoliberalism, or at least stereotypical liberal behavior, you don't like. It's really hard for most people to respond to "I hate you" in any other way than just this. And that's basically what's happening between progressives and moderate Dems right now. And there's no need for it. Number 4, stop telling Biden your vote can't be won. This one should be super easy. Even if you're not going to vote for Biden, why would you tell him that? If your vote is unwinnable, they won't even make an attempt to win it. I mean, that makes sense, right? If you're really committed to abstaining from voting, it would still make sense to give Biden an ultimatum such as M4A or else. On that same note, don't go around telling everyone that you think that no matter what Joe Biden says, he won't deliver anything. That means that once again, he has no reason to even attempt to win your vote, even through rhetoric. This is really repellent when the same people who are demanding changes to the platform claim the platform is a lie and won't be followed through on. I mean, do you care about them making platform changes or not? At least be consistent. And number 5, stop being so aggressive and emotional online. This is a video that emerged very recently on Twitter that has the Twitter left in near universal condemnation of the protesters. While I agree it looks extremely bad, the irony here is that a lot of the same people who are liking, retweeting, and replying in disgust on this video don't realize it's more or less a metaphor for how they, along with many other Twitter leftists, myself included at times, appear to act online. And not just leftists, of course, lots of people. I'm not qualified, and I'm not here to do a psychological analysis or to throw barbs. But what I will say is that too many people use Twitter like a drug, for cathartic relief and satisfaction, for release. And believe me, I get it. I constantly catch myself doing this. So when I say this is a thing many of us need to work on, it's not a moral judgment, but it is a fact. And once again, all this does is create enemies and make us look generally unreasonable and unstable. So what should we do? The first is we should do Orange Man bad tweets. I mean, it's the easiest possible way to earn trust and show you have a shared goal with the liberal Dems that has zero impact on your values or your political integrity. I mean, the Lincoln Project does basically nothing but shitty Orange Man bad tweets and has gone from non-existent to resistance liberals' #1 best friend on Twitter in about 6 months. And just today, they were already putting this rapport to use, promoting one of their favored candidates. And this is only the beginning of their influence from within the party. The fact that the left hasn't done something parallel to that is a huge failing. Number 2, defend the liberals against chuds when it makes sense, even if you don't particularly like the liberal. Once again, this shows you have goals and values that are aligned with the liberals, at least closer to them, and once again, you sacrifice nothing. Now, this is a little different, but just yesterday, Alyssa Milano and Charlotte Clymer, 2 people were reviled by Rose Twitter for their anti-Bernie roles in the primary, made an endorsement to Ed Markey, who is nearly universally supported by Rose Twitter. This was received with mixed appreciation, but overall, Rose Twitter seemed thankful and at the very least confused. They also both came to the defense of Adi Barkan, who was aggressively pro-Bernie during the primary when the right abused his voice and image in an anti-Biden attack ad. Now, you could say it was just because they were attacking Biden, but either way, in both of these situations, they're gaining a ton of support among the left while giving up zero support on their own side. Again, the left needs to get on this. Number 3, be helpful, not scornful. A lot of moderate and liberal Democrats are way behind on theory, plenty comfortable in their own lives, and without guidance may never come to understand our point of view. But as we saw with the Wall of Moms in Portland, they're still potentially extremely valuable allies. Instead of hating on them for their ignorance and taking every opportunity to dunk on them, be compassionate and offer them wisdom. Patient explanations and rebuttals in the face of snark and belligerence can be surprisingly effective. There have been many times I've gotten a person to consider a point of view they hadn't, simply by being persistent and generous when pushing my worldview. Oh, and vice versa, so make sure that you listen too. And number 4, make memes. If I had to guess, most of the work the Lincoln Project does, when they're not stealing content, is making anti-Trump memes and short, easy-to-make anti-Trump videos. We should be doing the same thing. The good thing about memes is that they can be framed in a way to smuggle in leftist content, or at least focus on issues that are more leftist than neoliberal or conservative. This allows your content and your ideas to be easily spread without having to battle it out with every single centrist, and liberals absolutely love spamming memes. If we can get them to spam leftist memes, whether they realize it or not, it'll be a very good thing. Okay, so, in summary, in order to win, we need to get more people to join the left, and liberals are by far the biggest, most easily won over group that we can draw from. And in order to win over liberals, we need to show them that we're the best group for them to be in, not just in policy, but also in rhetoric, integrity, and image. And to do that, we've got to be the shining example of what liberals aspire to become as a political body. This means we need to make ourselves and our movement look more attractive to liberals than what they're currently being offered. I mean, that's really all it comes down to. And that might mean showing a little bit more restraint than we would otherwise, or even being a little bit corny in order to win some liberal voters over. And above all else, we gotta cut down on the infighting.
Wait! No fighting!
But I think it's well worth it, because it won't just be enough to be right, or have the best policies, or the best ground game, or even the best Twitter insults. After all, they're not going to be bullied over to the left. Just like vote shaming doesn't work to encourage leftists to vote for mediocre candidates, neither does talking shit and telling libs that they're f***ing idiots all the time bring them over to the left. On the contrary, usually it just drives them away. I'm not saying to not correct them or to not critique the people they like. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. You want to critique the people they like. You want to say, hey, look, I think it's kind of a bad idea to put the toxic waste dump next to the children's play area or whatever. And the liberals are like, nah, it's cool, man, we got this. And the liberal voters are like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, the progressives are saying it doesn't seem safe, but you know what? We trust Joe Biden on this one. We're gonna go with Joe Biden. And then guess what? The f***ing playpen gets, this is getting really grim, but something goes wrong, and then the voters go, oh, we should have listened to the progressives. But again, they're not going to do that if we present ourselves as unreasonable, unreliable, or even unpalatable. For our own good and for the good of the future, join me in enacting a new strategy to bring liberal voters over to the left through persuasion and good stewardship. All right, that's about all I got for today. As I'm wrapping up, I just want to say again that this is just my opinion, and opinions change. And also I'm open to listening to counter arguments and other feedback, if it's reasonable. I don't think that I have all the answers, and I'm interested in hearing yours. So go down to the comments or hit me up on Twitter at DesmondSuga, and I'll try to respond. No promises, of course.